Mr. Rogers' Neighborhood was a kids show growing up, and I used to watch it as a kid, and even my parents used to watch it. It was a great show. It actually was so popular that it ran from 1968 to 2001 and actually aired 895 episodes. Mr. Rogers' Neighborhood was amazing. Many of you probably don't know that Mr. Rogers was actually a pastor in Pittsburgh, and he would start all of his episodes by coming in and singing the famous "Won't You Be My Neighbor" song. He'd slip off his jacket, slip on his pretty famous cardigan. There's actually one of his cardigans in the Smithsonian Museum. He'd slip on his cardigan and he'd come into his house and he'd sit down in one of his chairs and he'd take his shoes off that he had on from the day. He'd throw them over to one of the hands. He'd throw it down, take his other shoe off, and slip on some more comfortable shoes. But here's the deal. He started Mr. Rogers' Neighborhood because he didn't think back in his day that he had adequate television for kids. There was no good show on television for kids programming, and he wanted to create this wonderland called Mr. Rogers' Neighborhood because he wanted to instill into people to treat everyone on this earth with kindness. To treat everyone as their neighbor. And this idea of treating somebody as their neighbor came from the passage Matthew 22. It's a story about a guy that comes to Jesus and he says, "Jesus, what is the most important commandment of all?" And he says to him, "It's to love your God with all your heart, with all your soul, and with all your mind." He said, "But the second is just like it. It's to love your neighbor as yourself." And so Mr. Rogers knew that this was so important. He knew it was so important that Jesus actually addressed it in Scripture and said that this is how you're going to get to eternity. If you love me, and then if you love others just as yourself. How many of us can actually say that we love the person sitting beside us, or the person that we walked beside on the sidewalk today, or the person that was sitting beside us in class today in school? How many of us can actually say that we love them more than we love ourselves? I mean, if we're honest with each other, if we actually were truthful, we'd probably have to admit that we're pretty selfish. I mean, I'm selfish a lot of times. And a lot of times I put myself before others, and I'm wrong for doing it. And a lot of us do the same thing, and we're so wrong for doing it. But Mr. Rogers, he wanted us to get past that mindset of us being selfish. We're starting a new series called "Won't You Be My Neighbor?" And I want to get us back to that place of Mr. Rogers' Neighborhood. He hoped that the entire world would treat everyone with kindness. Not only did he hope that everybody would treat people with kindness, but he hoped that they would be thought of as special, that they would treat other people as if they were special. And it's crazy, man. I was watching this story the other day on the Discovery Channel, and it was a story about a man who had gotten bitten by a snake. This story was amazing.
I was bitten on September the 11th, 2001. The president had shut down all U.S. airspace. I was completely unaware of the attack on the country until several days after.
Being a member of the Urban Search and Rescue Team, I was actually getting prepared to go to New York to help with the World Trade Center. But I said to myself, I'm going to do whatever in my power not to lose my friend.
When Lawrence arrived at the hospital, he was going in and out of consciousness. The venom is still wreaking havoc inside of his body. It's breaking down muscles because the venom is myotoxic, and those muscle proteins can clog his kidneys, and he can die from kidney failure.
Taipan venom has a multitude of different toxins. It affects your heart, your muscles, your central nervous system. It also affects your blood and destroys your platelets. You're basically dealing with the worst of the worst. Multi-human system failure. Your body's shutting down on you.
He needs the anti-venom to reverse the whole process. Otherwise, he's not going to survive.
We had dealt with several other exotic venomous snake bites at that facility, cobra bites and vipers. When we said taipan, neither the doctor nor the nurses knew what we were talking about.
The doctors there were treating me with what you call a polyvalent anti-venom. It is a concoction of several snake venoms of the one general family. It is a broad spectrum treatment, but not highly specific. And that treatment was just barely keeping me alive. What I needed was the monovalent antivenom, made specifically from the venom of the taipan.
I knew there was only 2 locations in this country that had the anti-venom. One was New York and the other one was San Diego. New York was out of the question.
Lawrence Van Sertima needed an anti-venom that was almost 3,000 miles away. All non-military aircraft have been grounded, and we need a plane to fly from San Diego to Miami to save a man's life.
The crazy thing about this story is he got bit on September 11th, 2001. The World Trade Centers had just been hit, all flights were grounded, and here he was fighting for his life, and the only chance for him to live was for a plane to come from San Diego to Miami to carry some antivenom to save his life. And so, man, his friends who had truly loved this guy, I mean, they get on the phone, they're calling the government, they're calling cops, they're calling the police, trying to figure out what can they do to get this antivenom to him. And somehow, man, I don't know how they did it, but they made it possible. On September 11th, 2001, this was the only plane allowed to fly after the World Trade Centers had been hit. A plane from San Diego to Miami flew with the antivenom and saved this guy's life. They knew that it was a life and death situation, and they were going to do whatever it took to save this guy's life. And I mean, that's the place we need to get. I mean, seriously, when we come in contact with people, we have to understand that for them to know Jesus is life or death. And are we willing to do whatever it takes to save someone's life? I mean, over the next couple weeks, that's what we're going to talk about in this series, Won't You Be My Neighbor? And I hope during this journey, we'll grab that concept that everybody is special and we need to treat everybody with kindness. Let's do whatever it takes.
Let's make the most. Let's make